I wish I had believed her when she first warned me that I would regret my decision for the rest of my life. Let me share my story. Last night, my daughter Mabel had told me there was a little man in her room, said he was going to take her with him. I looked up from my cereal in surprise, focusing on the lithe life of her only daughter. With my best attempt at a fatherly gaze, she giggled, flashing her pearly white teeth. She was playing a game, I thought, so I smiled back and asked, "What kind of man is in your room, and where does he plan on taking you?" Mabel poured herself a bowl of frosted flakes, spilling a few pieces onto the counter. She replied, motioning with her hands to indicate a height of about 3 feet. And he had a really fun-looking face. I curiously, "You still haven't answered my other question, Mabel. Where does he want to take you?" She paused, thinking for a moment. I expect her to say something whimsical, maybe Neverland, inspired by the Peter Pan book she had recently finished and adored. Or perhaps Mount Rushmore, a fascination she had developed ever since we watched North by Northwest together. What had I been thinking, letting her see that movie? But her answer caught me off guard, and Oja said finally, "She said he would take me." A flicker of confusion crossed her face, and a spark of concern ignited in my mind. Could it be that my Mabel, with her boundless imagination, was losing her sense of wonder at the young age of 7? "Well," I said, forcing a grin, "you just let this little man visit you again while I'm at work. And when I get back, I expect a full report on where exactly he plans on taking you. After all, it would be a shame if he had to miss dinner tonight." I winked playfully and leaned in slightly. "I'm making steak." Her eyes lit up instantly, and that familiar radiant smile returned to her face. In a sudden burst of excitement, she sprang up and wrapped her tiny arms around my waist, pressing her cheek against my stomach. We woofed, hugging her back as best as I could while standing. "I love you, Dad," she whispered. A warm feeling spread through my chest and coursed through my veins, the kind of warmth only a daughter can bring. I knelt down, and she quickly pecked my cheek. Our usual morning tradition, before I grabbed my belt, fastening it securely along with my Smith & Wesson service revolver, and headed out for work. That evening, when I returned home, I found Mabel her usual spot, my stitching away. I stepped inside, my boots clunking heavily against the floor, and sat beside her on the bed. She was so absorbed in that she barely acknowledged me, offering only a distracted, "Hi, Daddy," without turning around. "What are you drawing, sweetheart?" I asked. Hesitation, she jumped. Eyes gleam. "I'm finished," she announced proudly, holding up her latest creation. I took the paper from her hands and felt my stomach tighten. The drawing was unsettling. The figure on the page was one of the most grotesque things I had ever seen. His head was oddly misshapen, his eyes within 2 enormous black billiard balls shoved into his skull. His mouth was nothing more than a thin, harsh lineage to deeper wrinkled skin. A strange unease crept over me. "Honey, what is this?" I asked, my voice quieter than before. I kept my voice steady, making sure not to let any hint of disapproval seep into my tone. "It's the man with the funny face," Mabel exclaimed with delight, recalling a little game from the previous morning. My concern eased slightly, and I offered her another reassuring smile. "So, tell me," I asked, keeping my tone light, "did this man visit you while I was at work?" Her eyebrows furrowed in what seemed like disappointment before she finally shook her head. "No, see, Mill, that's a shame," I replied, matching her disappointed tone. With that, I figured our game had run its course, and truthfully, I was suddenly relieved. The drawing Mabel had lingered in my mind, unsettling me far more than I cared to admit. The thought of something like that lurking in my house was too much to stomach. I made a mental note to keep her away from those horror comics. Clearly, it was starting to mess with her head. Night came, went, and just like the morning before, Mabel's first words over breakfast were eerily familiar. "He was a little man in my room last night," she said matter-of-factly, "and he says he's going to take me with him." I raised an eyebrow cautiously. Didn't he say that last night too? Well, yeah, she admitted, grabbing a peach from the fruit bowl. But this time, he said it again. The day went on as usual. Rubble kissed my cheek before I left for work, a cane dinner, and later, we watched a rerun of The Twilight Zone together before I finally collapsed into bed. Eager for a full night's rest, but sleep never came. Every time I shut my eyes, that face, the one from Mabel's drawing, flashed in my mind. Its grotesque features haunted me, and Steeble relentless. After tossing and turned like hours, I finally gave up and dragged myself out of bed, my body heavy with exhaustion, and wandered into Mabel's room, watching the gentle rise and fall of her small frame as she slept. She looked peaceful. I stepped over to her window, checking the latch. It was locked tight. There was no way in. Could have gotten in. Just to be thorough, I made my way through the house, checking every door and window. Feeling significant more at ease, I climbed back into bed, at last drifted into a deep, undisturbed sleep. The next morning, as I poured my coffee, I braced myself for the inevitable. As soon as Mabel spoke, I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. "There was a little man in my room last night," she said, a voice as steady as ever, "and he says going to take me with him." I cringed inwardly, though I forced my face to remain neutral. "Mabel," I started, my voice faltering slightly. "Do you think that stop playing this game?" She looked at me curiously. "What game, Daddy?" I exhaled, trying to sound gentle. "Honey, I know there's no man in your room, right?" Mabel's expression didn't change. She simply shook her head, slow and deliberate. "Mabel," I pressed, "I think what you're having is called a recurring nightmare. It's just a dream that happens over and over. It's normal to worry about." Her gaze remained an earling, blank and eerily devoid of the usual sparkle. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I'm not lying to you. And then he's going to take me with him." I stirred my coffee absently, mind racing for a way to put an end to this. Then, an idea struck me. I lifted my Gavon juice to my lips, hiding behind the rim before clearing my throat. "Mabel," I said, feigning seriousness, "do you think either parcel a message to this man for me?" She nodded, focused on buttering her toast. "Tell him," I continued, "that he's not welcome in this house anymore. And if he really wants to take someone, he should go after the Brewer kids up the street instead." For the first time in days, a glint of amusement flickered in her eyes. She knew how much of a menace the Brewers were. How relieved the entire neighborhood would be if they suddenly vanished without explanation. She grinned. "Okay, Daddy." Alternating, as the house settled into its usual nighttime stillness, I prepared for bed. I went to my dresser, pulled open the drawer, and reached for my revolver. The leather holster was smooth, perfectly maintained. I had always taken good care of it. Tonight, for the first time in years, I had city and might need it. I slid the gun from its protective case, staring down at the cold, gleaming metal, a tool designed for ending lives. And all my years as a police officer in this town, I had never once fired a shot. Twice I had been forced to draw it, but never had I needed to pull the trigger. Much like how, despite years of dedication, I had never earned that long, coveted promotion to detective. No matter how hard I worked, how much I proved myself, the position always remained just out of reach. A familiar twinge of bitterness crept in. My boss had made sure of that. All because I had glanced at his wife the wrong way. What kind of man lets something so dictate another's career? I swallowed down the frustration. There was no use dwelling on it. Anger could make a man reckless, and revivacity I needed was to let my resentment me into something I'd regret. With a decisive breath, I set the gun down on my nightstand and collapsed onto the bed. Call me powder, but tonight I just couldn't bring myself to sleep without it within reach. Morning arrived without incident. I had slept soundly, undisturbed, and waking up, I couldn't help but chuckle myself. Keeping the gun close had been unnecessary. Childish even, shaking my head at my own foolishness, I grabbed the pistol, returning it to its proper place, but head into the kitchen. Within minutes, I had breakfast ready, a simple bowl of oatmeal. I sat down, spooning bites absent-mindedly, my mind still sluggish from sleep. It wasn't until I was halfway through my meal that I realized something was off. Mabel hadn't come downstairs. Frowning, I set my spoon down. Mabel called. "Breakfast is ready." That was science. That was odd. She loved oatmeal. A strange unease stirred in my gut as I stood up, my gaze shifting toward the staircase. Through the leading into the living room, I could see the steps looming ahead, bathed in the soft morning light. Taking a deep breath, I had my way through the den and started up the stairs, slow and cautious. The hallway stretched before me, quiet and still, and Bulsden door was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of light-up painted wall. The very color I had painstakingly brushed on myself, much to her delight. A sudden, inexplicable dread gripped me. I wished that my gun was strapped to my hip. Horrifying possibilities flooded my mind. Visions of something lurking on the other side of that door, holding my daughter hostage, preventing her from calling out. And then, as if summoned from the deepest recesses of my fears, I pictured it. The thing from her drawing. Every instinct in my body screamed that if I pushed that door open, ready to pounce, maybe its mouth, no longer just a line, would split open, revealing sharp white teeth hidden beneath the bulls of its grotesque face. Maybe it would lunge at me, rip my throat out before I even had a chance to react. The logical side of my brain cut through the panic. "Scott, you're being ridiculous. There's nothing behind that door except your daughter, who probably just overslept. Revolve that. Now stop standing here like an idiot and open it." I swallowed hard, tension tightening in my chest like the winding of a clock's inner gears. Forcing my feet forward, I reached out, pressing my fists against the wood. I pushed. The door creaked open slowly, the sound grating against my nerves. I stepped inside, flicking on the light. The room was empty. My breath hitched. The sheets on her bed were tangled, twisted, as if she had struggled against something. My pulse pounded, my ears scanned the space, my eyes darting wildly, searching for any sign of where she could have gone. Then I saw them. 10 deep scratches, gouge into the wooden floor beside the bed. They stretched nearly 10 feet across the room, long and jagged, as if someone had been dragged, yanked from their bed and pulled, kicking and claying across the floor. A cold, paralyzing fear gripped me. Something had taken her. And then, as I took a shaky step forward, my gaze locked onto something on the floor, something that made my stomach drop and my hands tremble. I had just discovered it on the floor, a fingernail. Small, no bigger than a sleeping pill, and unmistakably thin. A chill ran through me. Beyond that, there was a faint smear of blood. A broken trail that led all the way to the second-story window. It was wide open. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying with it the weight of my worst fears. My vision blurs, the tears that had gathered in my eyes finally spilled over, and I collapsed onto the floor sobbing. Mabel was gone. How had I not seen this coming? The little man with the funny face and visitor hadn't been some imaginary friend. He had been real. And I, a police officer, had been too much of a fool to recognize the warnings. I should have listened. I should have done something. But now it was too late. She had been taken, kidnapped. But by who? And every door, every window had been locked. There was no way anyone could have entered. No way this should have been possible. Questions swirled in my mind, clashing violently with the grief plying at my chest. But I couldn't afford to wallow in despair. I needed to act. I needed to start investigating. And the only place to begin was Mabel's bedroom. Descending the stairs with unsteady steps, I made my way to the basement storage room and retrieved my camera. Back upstairs, I meticulously documented the scene, taking after picture, ensuring not a single detail was overlooked. The fingernail caught my attention again. Examining it closely, and noting its angle, its positioning, Rahaf fought back. She had tried to hold her ground, digging her fingers in until the force dragging her away finally won. A nail had bent back, snapping off completely. Gruesome testament to her struggle. I winced at the thought. I knew the pain must have been unbearable. I had experienced something similar myself. Why had to remove an ingrown toenail? It had become infected, and there was no other choice. The memory of that agony, of the pliers yanking it free, haunted me. I had screamed in sheer anguish, dunking my foot into ice water to numb the searing pain. Mabel would have screamed too. So why hadn't I heard her? Pain like that, like this, was never suffered in silence. The only way I wouldn't have heard her cries was if someone, or something, had silenced her. A hand over her mouth, a cloth tightens her legs, but that didn't make sense. I already knew she had been dragged by her ankles. How could someone cover her mouth and pull her away at the same time? Unless whatever took her had more than two arms. A fresh wave of dread washed over me. I needed more evidence. Rushing downstairs, I rifled through my work drawer, gathering the supplies I had purchased online, and had once hoped to use them for my detective work, the job I had worked tirelessly for but never got. Back in Mabel's room, I got to work dusting for fingerprints. Every surface, every possible point of contact, covered it all. The window bedposts, the floorboards, nothing. Every print belonged to Mabel. Frustration welled up inside me. I clenched jaw, berating myself. Did I really think this would be that easy? Ad Hoover, or whoever, had taken my be careless enough to leave fingerprints behind. With a growl of anger, I hurled my brush across the room and raked my fingers through my hair, desperately trying to figure out my next move. The roof. Maybe the answer was up there. Steadying myself, I climbed through the second-story window, lowering my body onto the rooftop. My hands trembled slightly as I balanced, scanning the surface for anything that could offer a clue. And then I saw it. I could see where the shingles had been disturbed, kicked loose by hurried movements. Following a disrupted path, I carefully made my way across the roof until I reached the edge. Below me stood the arbor I had installed for the grapevine that thrived near our porch. Suddenly all made sense. This was how something, or some, made their way up. But that still didn't explain how they had gotten inside. The windows had been locked. I climbed back into the house in my bedroom window, my mind racing. If I could keep tracking the trail, maybe, just maybe, I could figure out where Mabel had been taken. If she was still alive at all, the foster kid. And once again, hot tears welled in my eyes, cutting silent tracks down my aging face. Losing my only daughter was unthinkable. I hadn't lost my wife and son before. Memories came crashing in like a tidal wave. The last time I saw Ellen, my wife, was on a grey rain-soaked Wednesday and kissed me goodbye, saying she was heading out for groceries. That was the last time I ever saw her. She never came back, and Mixa found out she had driven down to Florida and married some wealthy businessman. Just like that, she had abandoned me and the kids. There had been no warning, no final argument, no explanation, just silence. I remembered sitting with head in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. But no matter how much I tortured myself with questions, and reversed eventually, I had run out of tears. And when there was nothing left to feel, I did the only thing I could. I moved forward, pretending it had never happened. My son had been 10 when he drowned. He had been playing near the river with his best friend, Richie Parker. Richie and bet $3 shiny silver dollars that he couldn't swim to the sandbar in the middle of the river and back. Girl didn't know how to swim, and those silver dollars must have looked loathly tempting. I wasn't there when it happened, but I know it didn't take long. I let Mabel stay home from the funeral. She had been only 3 at the time, too young to understand. Maybe it was ridiculous to think that shielding her from that day would protect her from the loss, but I did it anyway. I told myself it was for her own good. As I slowly stood over his small, lifeless body, I made a vow I intended to keep at any cost. I would never let Mabel slip through my fingers the way Gerald had. I would protect her. I would keep her close. I would never allow anything to happen to her. Some people might have called me overpursuers. If it didn't matter, if it kept Mabel safe, it was worth it. And now she was gone, taken, maybe dead, and here was Para's grief, able to even stand and face it like a man. No, I refused to believe she was alive. She had to be. Maybe hurt, maybe terrified, but alive. I strapped on my police belt, securing my sidearm, and stepped outside. The morning air, once something I found beautiful, now felt hostile. I scanned the yard, searching for anything, any clue that could set me on Mabel's trail. Then I saw it. A torn scrap of pink fabric, and rushed notchwood, ibble soft, a jama fabric, Mabel's pajamas. Ahead of me, the thick woods loomed, the very woods I was sworn never to enter without me. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, descending into the semi-darkness beneath the dense canopy of leaves. I stayed low, eyes locked on the ground, scanning for any sign that I was on the right path. It wasn't easy. At times, doubt crept in. Was I really following the right trail? Small, scattered breadcrumbs leading me forward. A distorted footprint, pressed awkwardly into the dirt. A drop of blood glistening on a leaf. A broken branch, snap curiosity out of place. Each clue pushed me forward, deeper into the woods. And with every step, I knew I was getting closer. If only I had bloodhounds. The thought lingered in my mind as I considered calling the station, requesting a couple of tracking dogs to be sent out. I decided and report Mills Kinnickling once I got back, if I didn't find anything more on my own. The trail remained faint, just scattered clues building together a path forward. Only once did I come across a footprint that was fully visible, but even then, something about it unsettled me. And looked, the shea foot was strangely curved, and instead of 5 toes, there were only 3. I frowned, dismissing it as a distortionful or a trick of the dirt. Regardless, I snapped a photo with my camera before pressing on. An hour passed. I moved slowly, methodically, deeper into the wilderness of the woods. Each step carried me further into the unknown, my only guide the scattered remnants of a struggle. A broken branch here, a disturbed patch of earth there. Each trunk withered, a memory surfaced in my mind. I was 10 years old, and my father was taking me hunting for the first time. Excitement buzzed through me. I had been waiting for as long as I could remember. My father dressed me in layers of heavy camouflage, bundling me up so much that I'd topple over if I moved too quickly. He then placed the rifle in my arms, his voice firm as he walked me through the basics of gun safety. A cap been pulled down tightly over my ears, but I didn't care. I had shot guns before at my friend's house. I already knew the rules. With that, we set off into the woods, weaving through the dense trees in search of a buck. At some point, I asked if I could take my cap off. He nodded, and the moment I pulled it free, and raised a hand signing me to stop. I froze as he crouched down, examining something in the mud. He motioned for me to come closer, and I carefully placed the butt of my rifle against the ground as I kneeled beside him. There, imprinted in the earth, were the tracks of a deer. In a hushed whisper, he explained the fundamentals of tracking. At first, I was terrible at it, clumsy, impatient. But with time, and with my father's patient guidance, I improved. We went into the woods together more and more often, and before long, tracking became second nature to me. By the time I was a teenager, I was one of the best trackers in town. A faint smile tugged my lips despite the desperate situation I was now in. It was a memory I cherished, one of the few moments in my life untouched by pain and loss. My reminiscing was short-lived. Only few knew the woods abruptly ended. I found myself standing at the edge of the Brewer family's cornfield. Pale yellow stalks stretched out before me, rustling gently in the wind. Their movements felt almost taunting, as if the field itself was mocking me. Who had taken Mabel had brought her through here? There was no doubt about it. But now I had a new problem. I couldn't just go marching onto Brewer property. Even as a police officer, I needed a warrant to search the land. If I trespassed without permission, I could very well get shot. Bart Brew was notorious for his hostility toward uninvited guests. I remember the incident from a year ago, how a terrified 9-year-old boy had come into the Millport police station, sobbing so hard we could barely understand him. Once we calmed him down enough to speak, he managed to choke out his story. He had been playing baseball with his friends when the ball had landed on the Brewer property. When he went to retrieve it, Bart Brewer had come out and shoved the muzzle of a gun straight in his face. The man was ruthless. A new, troubling thought crept into my mind. What if it was the Brewers he'd taken Mabel? The idea unsettled me, though I couldn't explain why. I didn't know the Brewers well, but what I did know wasn't reassuring. Her kids were troublemakers. Their father had a history of illegal hunting, and their reputation for being unkind, bordering on cruel, was widely known. I had always trembled to stay far away from them. Yet somehow the answer lay in those stalks of corn. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward. I knew it. Without a second thought, I strode forward, pushing deeper into the cornfield. Tracking the trail here was far easier than it had been in the forest. The stalks had been trampled, forming a clever head. The sun rose higher in the sky and sweat gathered on my brow, but I didn't stop. I kept moving, the crunch of dried husbandry boots and the rustling of stalks against my arms and legs the only sounds accompanying me. Any moment now, I expected to be met by Bart Brewer and muzzle of his 8-gauge shotgun. I half prepared myself for the deafening blast, for the sudden burst of pain and inevitable collapse into the dirt. But it never came. The farm remained eerily silent, untouched. No shouts of trespassers, no fretting concurring through the rows, nothing me the corn and the path leading me forward. And then, suddenly it ended. I stepped into an open space, still surrounded by the towering corn, but now standing in a large, flattened clearing. The stalks had been pressed down, forming a perfect circle roughly 20 feet across. It was as something had cleared it out intentionally, but Mabel was gone. There were no more signs of a struggle, no more tracks, no more clues. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed whole, taking her captor along with her and leaving behind only an empty void. I searched, combing over every inch of the clearing. Nothing. A decision had to be made. I could call the station, bring in the rest of the force, and launch a full-scale investigation of the Brewer farm. That was the obvious choice, wasn't yet? I hesitated. I sank down onto the trampled stalks, my mind racing. After all these years of hard work, of dedication, I had never given my promotion detective. It had been my dream since the moment I left college. Start as a patrol officer, climb the ranks, prove myself, and earn that title. But no matter how much I had wanted it, no matter how I had done my job, the opportunity had never come. If I solved this case on my own, if I found no anyone's help, there would be no denying me that promotion. Even my boss, with all his personal grudges, wouldn't be able to ignore it. This wasn't just about my daughter anymore. It was about proving myself. With renewed determination, I made a plan. I would return to the Brewer farm that night for a stakeout. I would watch, wait, and capture any suspicious activity with photographic evidence. If something was happening here, I would find out. That exactly 10 p.m. As the last traces of sunlight disappeared beyond the horizon, I set out. I parked my car on a ridge overlooking the Brewer farm, turned off the enchilling. The hours crawled by, nothing. No movement. No lights flickering on inside the farmhouse. No figure slipping through the shadows. Doubt began to creep. This is pointless. I should just go home, get some sleep, and call the department in the morning. Hopelessness gnawed at me. Who cared if I never made detective? Was that really what mattered right now? What were the odds of me actually finding Mabel on my own? Slim to none. Maybe I was wasting my time. Worse, maybe not reporting this sooner, I was making things worse. What if I was jeopardizing the case? What if Mabel was already dead? What if calling the department right now could still save her? The weight of indecision pressed down on me unbearable. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to a resolution. If nothing happened the next 5, I would leave. I would call the station and report everything. I glanced at my watch. 2337 am. I exhaled slowly. Exhaustion rode in me like heavy on fumes. Every movement felt sluggish, forced. My vision blurred. Dark spots danced at the edges of my sight. My head grew eyelids drooping against my will. I let them close for just a second. Just a second. And for the briefest moment, I allowed myself the comfort of sleep. I wasn't resting my eyes, just for a minute. Then, suddenly, a brilliant flash of light. My eyes snapped open, and what I saw left me in stunned silence. Suspended in the night sky slowly to some glowing white orb, it spun rapidly, casting beams of every color imaginable in every direction. Colors I recognized, colors I had now seen before, colors that shouldn't exist. It was like my brain couldn't comprehend what I was witnessing. The thing radiated energy, waves of something unseen, something powerful ripping through the air. I felt them. A deep hum vibrated through my chest, through my very bones, as the spinning light hovered lower and lower until, with a soft whoosh, it landed in the center of the brewer cornfield. The moment it touched down, the surrounding stalks flattened instantly, forming a perfect circle around it. I could only watch. Mess wasn't normal. This wasn't human. The realization struck like lightning. This is something extraterrestrial. Wonder overpowered every emotion flooding through me. Could I be the first person to witness something like this up close? The first to see proof of life beyond Earth? Something deep within me stirred. An overwhelming, undeniable urge to step out of the car, to walk forward, to enter the pulsating, spinning vortex of light. Then, not spoken, not felt, inside my own head, walk into the light, Scott. My breath hitched. I spun around inside the car, searching for the source of the voice. But I was alone. Then understood was a voice from outside. It was inside me. Not my own thoughts, but something else. Someone else pushing their words into my mind. Step it, you will see your daughter again. All you have to do is walk forward. A chill raced down my spine. My fingers twitched, unconsciously reaching for the door lock. I safe. Like everything was meant to be this way. You will know every pleasure mankind has ever known. Just take a step, Scott. Just step into the light. The voice was so wanting. I wanted to listen. I wanted to believe it. My hand hovered over the door handle. Then no. I clenched my eyes shut. Forcing understood. I knew man had gotten into Mabel's room. She had let him in, and I knew I hadn't encountered Barbara when he is family when I trespassed on their land. They had already gone into the light. Scott, there is no reason to resist. The pressure in my skull intensified. My heart pounded against my ribs as I fought back, battling the voice, the temptation, the overwhelming pull to mute the light. I came to a Scott. Mabel is waiting. No. Join us, Scott. No. The mental war raged on for what felt like an eternity. Minutes stretched infinity as against something I knew was far more powerful than me. And yet, I couldn't give up. These things, whoever they were, whatever had taken Mabel, why should I trust them? The only way to free Mabel is to come to us. I gritted my teeth, my breath coming in ragged gasps. They were lying. They had no reason to let her go. As long as I stayed here, as long as I resisted, they would keep her. The weight of my situation slammed into me like a freight train. I had no backup, no plan. I had no idea how to fight this. I racked my brain scrambling for a way out, for something to answer this force pressing down on me. But no answer came. And as the humming light bathed the cornfield in an unearthly glow, deep down, this was a battle I might not win. There was no other option, no other path, no other choice but the one they had already set before me. Scott, the light. You must walk into moment. I hesitated. But then, with a deep breath, my hand moved. Not by their will, but by my own. Slowly, deliberately. I unlocked the car door. It creaked, and as I stepped down the ledge, my footing cautious, my heart pounding. Every second stretched out endlessly, yet I forced myself to move. This wasn't something I wanted to do, I had to do. For Mabel. Step by step, I advanced toward the cornfield, my focus locked onto the pulsating, mesmerizing light. Its pull wasn't just physical, it was something deeper, something that called to the mind, to the very essence of being. Like a moth drawn to flame. Within a minute, I was pushing my way through the towering stalks, the dried husks brushing against my skin as radiant beams cut through the darkness. The closer I got, the brighter it became. It filled my vision in blinding, all-consuming brilliance. 10 feet away now. I stopped, my legs trembling, my breath shallow. Then, gathering every ounce of willpower, I pressed on. Finally, I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the swirling, pulsating mass of impossible colors and undulating energy. The very ground beneath me hummed with its power. I opened my mouth and screamed. A shape moved within the light. A small, stumbling figure emerged, her tiny frame barely visible against the overwhelming glow. The light clung to her, slithering across her skin liquid, refusing to let go. But then, with a final wrenching pull, she tore herself free. My heart nearly burst from my chest. I called her name again. Her head snapped to me, recognition flickering across her terrified face. Then she ran. She barreled straight into my arms, and I lifted her, crushing her against me in a desperate embrace. I sobbed, holding her as tightly as I could, my body racked with relief, fear, and overwhelming love. She clung to me just as fiercely, her small arms gripping my neck like she never wanted to let go. Her whole body shook, as if she had been standing in the freezing cold for hours. I rubbed her back, trying to soothe her. She whispered, her voice weak, trembling. "You have to go back. They did terrible things to me. I barely survived. I don't want you to get like a chicken." I for a split considered running. I could turn, Mabel in my arms, and flee from this nightmare. But would they let us go? I kept my grip on Mabel, but one hand instinctively pivoted to the pistol at my side. How had I forgotten about it? As if sensing my defiance, the voice slithered back into my mind. "But this different," it was angry. "Cat. Don't make this harder than it has to be." A sinister undertone laced its once soothing cadence. "You will not leave here, Revives, if you resist." I twitched my jaw, my fist tightening around the handle of my gun. My mind raced. Was there any way out of this? Any way to fight back? Was still shaking against me, her breathing quick and uneven. I looked down at her, forcing myself to smile despite the lump in my throat. "And don't want to this," I whispered. "Promised myself I'd never lose you." The weight of my vow, made all those years ago over Gerald's lifeless body, pressed down on me, crushing before. I couldn't fail again. Mabel's deep blue eyes locked onto mine, shimmering with tears. I took a steadying breath, forcing confidence into my voice. "You needn't to go. Get help." Her face twisted in anguish. "No." "Yes." I wiped the tears from her cheeks with my thumb. "There's a cell phone in my car, and call the right." As she nodded, badly but fresh tears spilled over. "Daddy, please," she begged. "Don't do this to me, and revolt you." Her words hit me the knife to the gut. I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly to clear my own vision. "Don't cry, Mabel," I murmured. "It hurts me to see you cry," was a light. We both did. But she nodded anyway, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I set her down gently, watching as she struggled to breathe through her brief. For a final moment, I looked into her eyes, and memorizing every detail. The soft glow of the multicolored lights reflecting in her pupils, the quiet innocence still lingering beneath the terror. Then, with a shattering breath in my heart, I screamed, "Moo, Rune." She hesitated for only a second. Then she turned and bolted toward the car. I watched her go, watched her disappear into the stalks, and I out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I turned. The light awaited me. It didn't matter what was about to happen. It didn't matter what they would do to me. All that mattered was that Mabel was safe. Without hesitation, I stepped forward and walked into the light.